Since when do we let people like you breathe the same air as clean citizens in this counter, huh?
District Attorney Cliff Mercer barked a harsh laugh. His face contorted in pure condescension as he aggressively snatched the defense's critical evidence folder and slammed it onto the table. Causing a heavy stack of legal documents to fly across the floor, he lunged forward with a sudden burst of motion, invading the personal space of Marcus Webb, a young black man who sat completely still at the defendant's table. Mercer leaned in, his jaw moving with explosive anger.
Look at your black skin, buddy. You're just a dangerous animal from the streets, and you belong behind bars. Stop wasting this court's time and get out before I put you where you belong.
The courtroom erupted into a chaotic explosion of cruel laughter from the sheriff's deputies. Marcus Webb kept his head down, his jaw tight, forced to absorb the public humiliation in complete silence. The judge slowly raised his gavel to seal the wrongful conviction, completely blind to the corruption. But they had absolutely no idea that a quiet black woman in a charcoal gray suit, sitting in the second row of the gallery, was holding a secret that would make the entire courtroom go silent in less than 60 seconds. The morning Naomi Grace Caldwell walked into Harlan County Superior Court. She was wearing her second-best suit, not her best. Her best suit she kept for the days that required performance, the federal hearings, the cameras, the rooms where powerful men wore their most expensive haircuts and called it credibility. Her second-best suit was the one she wore when she needed to think clearly, when she needed to remember that she was not there to impress anyone. It was charcoal gray. Her mother had ironed it the night before, even though Naomi had told her she didn't need to. "Let me do something," her mother had said, moving the iron across the lapel. Naomi had let her. She had driven down from the district office the night before and stayed in a motel off the highway, a clean, unremarkable place, with a vending machine in the hallway and a parking lot that smelled faintly of motor oil and cut grass. She had eaten a sandwich she had packed in Meridian, sat on the bed with her case files spread across the comforter, and read for 4 hours. Not the web file specifically, she had the web file memorized by that point. The way you memorize a thing when you have read it often enough that the words stop being information and start being something more like a map of someone's life. She read the other 16. She read the names, the charges, the dates, the conviction records, 16 other men, 16 other families who had sat in a gallery with their hands folded and waited for a system to deliver something that looked like justice, and received instead something that looked like it. She turned off the light at midnight. She did not sleep well. At 5:30 in the morning, she was at the small motel desk with her legal pad and a cup of coffee from the machine in the hallway. Writing. Not case notes. Just writing, the kind of writing she had done since she was 14 years old, and her father had given her a spiral notebook and told her that words on paper had a gravity that words in your head did not. She wrote about what she expected to happen that day, and what she expected to feel, and what she was afraid of. She had been doing this before every significant moment of her professional life for 20 years. She had boxes of those notebooks at her apartment. She had never reread a single one. Because the writing was not for the archive. It was for the morning. It was for the room she was about to walk into. At 7:15 she showered and put on the charcoal gray suit and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. She thought about what her father used to say about mirrors. You are not looking at what you are. You are looking at what you are deciding to be. She picked up her shoulder bag. She picked up her brown paper lunch bag. She locked the motel room door behind her. She parked her 2009 Honda Civic in the public lot, 3 blocks from the courthouse. She did not use her federal credentials to claim a reserved space. She locked the car, adjusted the strap of her shoulder bag, and walked the 3 blocks slowly, the way her father had always told her to approach a room where something important was about to happen. Walk like you know something they don't. He used to say, not fast, not slow. Deliberate. She walked deliberate. The Harlan County Superior Court was a building that believed in itself. Red brick. White columns. A stone staircase, wide enough for 6 people walking abreast. The kind of architecture that said justice is weighty and permanent and does not apologize for taking up space. Naomi had grown up 2 counties over. She had sat on the courthouse steps as a child while her grandmother waited for a name to be called that was never called. She had learned early that a building's confidence and a building's fairness were not the same thing. She had learned it early because she had been taught to pay attention. Her grandmother, Celestine Caldwell, had been a woman who paid attention to everything. She noticed which store clerks looked through her and which ones looked at her. She noticed which church pews were always empty and which were always full, and what that said about a congregation's relationship to comfort. She noticed the way certain men in certain positions held their mouths when they were about to say something they had already decided was final. A slight compression of the lips. A forward tilt of the chin. The physical grammar of a man who had decided before you spoke that your speaking was a formality he was managing rather than information he was receiving. Celestine had noticed all of this, and she had passed it to Naomi, the way you pass a language not in lessons. But in years of being in the same room together, watching the same world and talking about what you saw, Naomi had built a federal career on the inheritance of that attention. She climbed the steps. Inside the courthouse, the morning air smelled like floor wax and old wood, and the particular stillness of a place where people were always waiting for something to happen to them. Naomi moved through the lobby with her shoulder bag, her brown paper lunch bag, and her legal pad folded in her jacket pocket. The security officer at the metal detector nodded without looking up. She did not offer her federal ID. She cleared the detector and walked toward courtroom 7. Through the small window in the door, she could see the gallery filling up. Marcus Webb's family occupied the left side, his mother in a church hat. His 2 younger sisters pressed against her sides like birds under a wing. His grandmother in the end seat with her hands folded the way older black women fold their hands in courtrooms. The way that is not prayer and is not peace, but is something made of long practice. On the right side of the gallery sat 6 people from the Harlan County Sheriff's Department, 2 local journalists, and a man in a dark suit who had the particular stillness of someone who works for a politician. Naomi looked through the window for a long time. Then she pushed through the door and found a seat in the second row of the gallery. On the left side, 3 seats away from Marcus Webb's mother. She set her bag on her knees. She unfolded the legal pad and smoothed it on her thigh. Nobody looked at her twice. That was exactly as she intended. Marcus Webb was 24 years old. He sat at the defendant's table in a dress shirt that was slightly too large at the collar. The way dress shirts are when a family buys them for a court appearance, bought with care. Bought with hope. Bought in the full knowledge that the person wearing it would be sitting in front of 12 strangers who were about to make a decision about the rest of his life. He was a young man with the particular stillness of someone who had been told too many times in the past several months not to react, not to show anything, not to give anyone a reason to form a bad impression. He sat very still. His hands were folded on the table in front of him. He looked at those hands more than he looked at the room. He had a public defender, Raymond Tate. A decent man buried under 140 cases. Raymond had met with Marcus 4 times in 3 months. He had done what he could, which was considerably less than what was needed. It was not Raymond's fault in the specific sense. It was Raymond's fault in the diffuse, systemic sense that belongs to every person who operates inside a machine that processes certain human beings faster and cheaper, and with less scrutiny than it processes others, and who continues to operate inside it without saying so. The charge was armed robbery, a convenience store 2 miles from Marcus's apartment. The prosecution's evidence consisted of 1 eyewitness identification made at night by a store clerk who had been, by his own account, very frightened and who had, in his initial police statement, described the perpetrator as maybe 5 to 9 or 5 to 10. Hard to say. Marcus Webb was 5 to 8. A surveillance video showed a man in a gray hoodie who moved with the quick, angular stride of someone in a hurry, a description that could have fit 1,000 men in that county on any given night. And the testimony of Deputy Carl Benton. Benton was the keystone. He was always the keystone. In the 17 cases Naomi had spent 3 weeks reading, Benton was the consistent, polished, unshakable center around which everything else was organized. He had a gift for clarity on the stand. A gift for seeming like a man who had simply observed facts and reported them without agenda or distortion. He used straightforward language. He looked at juries. He paused at the right moments. He was, in the technical sense of the word, a very good witness. What he was not, in several of those 17 cases, was a truthful one. Naomi knew this because she had read the body cam logs. She had cross-referenced the timestamps of Benton's stated observations against the geographic coordinates logged by his unit's GPS. She had found, in 4 separate cases, small discrepancies, not dramatic discrepancies. Not the kind you would notice if you were reading quickly or if you trusted the officer testifying, but discrepancies of the kind that accumulate, that build a shape, that mean something when you see them side by side. She had also found 3 filed complaints against Benton from defense attorneys in prior cases. Complaints that had been received, logged, and quietly filed without review. She had found that the reviewing officer for all 3 complaints was the same name, and she had found that that same name appeared twice in Mercer's phone records during the weeks before the Webb preliminary hearing. She had spent the last 3 weeks reading every document connected to Marcus Webb's case. She had driven to Harlan County on her own time, without a federal subpoena, without a press release, without a staff attorney, and she had sat in a public library 2 blocks from the courthouse and read. And then she had driven back to the district office and read some more. And then she had made 17 phone calls over 2 days. And what she had assembled at the end of it was not a certainty, not yet. Not quite. Not without Dottie Mae, but was something that a civil rights investigator would have known immediately. Was a pattern that had 17 faces. She had their names written on the back of the folded legal pad in her jacket pocket. Judge Harlan Prescott entered the courtroom at precisely 9 o'clock in the morning. He was a large man in his 60s with white hair and a slow, satisfied way of moving, like a man who had long ago decided that the world operated on his schedule and had since been proven right. His robe was pressed. His bench was polished. His name was on a plaque on the wall to his left, a plaque that had been mounted there by his father, who had also been a judge in this courtroom, and who had presided over cases Naomi would not say the names of aloud in a public place. She had looked those cases up, too. She had found them in the county archive on her 3rd visit, in folders that were old and slightly brittle, the way paper gets when it has been in a filing cabinet for 50 years and no one has touched it because the outcomes are settled in the way of things that were settled by people who had the power to settle them, and who did so in rooms where there was no one present who might object. She had read those files for 2 hours. She had not made copies. She had simply read them, closed the folders, replaced them in the cabinet exactly as she found them, and driven away. She had thought about them every day since. "All rise," said the bailiff. Everyone rose. Prescott settled into his chair with the deliberate ease of a man sitting down to a meal he had already ordered. "Be seated," he said. Everyone sat. Naomi watched him. She watched the way he looked at Marcus Webb, not a long look, not an obvious look, but a brief, settling look, the kind a man gives when he has already decided and is simply confirming it. She had seen that look before. She had been on the receiving end of it in rooms where she was the only black woman and was asked 3 times whether she needed help finding her seat. She had catalogued that look the way her grandmother had catalogued the slight compression of the lips, the forward tilt of the chin. She had a taxonomy of dismissal that she had been building since she was 7 years old, and understood instinctively that understanding it was a form of survival. She wrote 1 word on the legal pad. Confirmed. Then she folded it back into her pocket. District Attorney Cliff Mercer opened the case with the confidence of a man who had already written his press release. He was polished in the way of men who practiced being polished. The careful pause before a key phrase. The slight lean toward the jury when something important was said. The habit of addressing the jurors by their chair numbers as if he had memorized their names and was simply too busy to use them. He spoke for 31 minutes. He used the word dangerous 11 times. He used Marcus Webb's full name every single time he referenced the defendant, with a particular emphasis on the middle name, a practice Naomi had once described in a federal brief as a microaggression designed to dehumanize the defendant through forced formality. She had counted 11 times. When Mercer finished, Raymond Tate rose and gave a defense opening that was competent and brief, and that the jury listened to with the polite inattention of people waiting for something they had already decided to wait through. Naomi watched the jury. 8 white faces, 3 black faces, 1 Latino face. She watched who looked at Marcus when Mercer spoke. She watched who looked at the floor. Then she waited. Deputy Carl Benton took the stand at 10:47 in the morning. He was a man in his mid-40s with the particular physical confidence of someone who had spent many years being the tallest, most uniformed person in most rooms. He settled into the witness chair like a man sitting in his own living room. He crossed his right leg over his left knee. He looked at the jury with easy, practiced sincerity. District Attorney Mercer walked him through the sequence: the dispatch call, the arrival at the scene, the canvass of the area, the identification of Marcus Webb 2 blocks from the convenience store, the subsequent arrest. Benton spoke in clean, confident sentences. He did not hesitate. He did not qualify. He said the defendant, the way Mercer said Marcus Webb's full name with a particular weight, a small but deliberate emphasis that placed a verdict in the word before the verdict had been reached. Naomi listened. She wrote nothing on the pad during Benton's testimony. She was watching something else. In the far corner of the courtroom, behind a small desk that most people in the gallery could not fully see, sat Dottie Mae Briggs, 63 years old, court transcript reporter. She had been sitting at that desk, in that courtroom, since 1993. She was a black woman with reading glasses pushed up into silver-streaked hair, and she transcribed every word spoken in courtroom 7 into a machine that sat on her desk. Dottie Mae was transcribing Benton's testimony with the mechanical efficiency of a woman who had heard 31 years' worth of testimony and knew the way you know the smell of rain before it falls. When something was wrong with a story, Naomi watched her. Dottie Mae did not look up from her machine, but her jaw was slightly tight. Raymond Tate's cross-examination of Deputy Benton lasted 12 minutes and accomplished approximately what 12 minutes against a well-prepared law enforcement witness typically accomplishes in a courtroom where the judge had already decided. Prescott sustained 3 of Mercer's 4 objections within the first 4 minutes. He sustained 2 more in the following 8. When Tate pressed Benton on the lighting conditions at the arrest location, a genuinely important question, given that the arrest occurred at 11:23 at night on a street that Naomi had personally visited and documented as having 2 non-functional streetlights, Prescott interrupted before Mercer could even object. "Counselor," Prescott said, with the measured patience of a man explaining something obvious to someone slow. "The witness has answered the question. Move along." "Your Honor, I have the right to follow up." I said move along. "Mr. Tate." Tate moved along. Naomi watched this. She unfolded the legal pad. She wrote 1 sentence: Judge instructed defense counsel to abandon line of questioning on material evidence. She underlined it. Then she folded the pad, placed it back in her pocket, stood up quietly, stepped past 2 people in the gallery row, walked up the center aisle, and pushed through the courtroom doors. She sat in the hallway on a wooden bench and made 3 phone calls. The first was to her supervising attorney in the federal district office. She spoke for 4 minutes. She described what she had observed. She said the words pattern of conduct and systemic suppression of exculpatory evidence and civil rights violation under color of law. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You have no jurisdiction in a state court proceeding." Her supervisor said, "You know that." "I have jurisdiction," Naomi said, "if I can demonstrate a federal civil rights violation, and I believe I can." Another pause. "What do you need?" "I need you to call Judge Patricia Hollins in the federal district." I need her to issue a temporary restraining order on the verdict pending a federal civil rights review. And I need it in 2 hours. Naomi, 2 hours. Is a young man's life? She said. I know what I'm asking. She could hear her supervisor breathing carefully on the other end of the line. She had worked with this woman for 4 years. She respected her deeply. She also knew from 4 years of careful observation that her supervisor had a tell when she was about to say yes to something difficult. She exhaled slowly through her nose. Like a woman releasing something she had been holding, she heard the exhale. I'll call Hollins right now. Her supervisor said. She hung up. The second call was to a federal marshal she knew from a case 2 years prior, a woman named Agent Diana Cruz, who had once told Naomi, in a courthouse parking lot after a long and complicated day, that the thing she appreciated most about working with Naomi was that she never asked for anything she didn't actually need. Naomi had remembered that. She spoke for 90 seconds. She gave the courthouse address. She said, I will call you when I need you. And Diana said understood without asking any further questions. The third call was to a number she had written on the back of a grocery receipt 3 weeks earlier. After a librarian in Meridian, a small, precise woman named Mrs. Garrett, who wore cardigans and had opinions about everything, had mentioned, almost as an aside, at the end of a conversation about the county's legal history, that there was a woman who had worked in the courthouse for as long as anyone could remember, and who sometimes walked past the library on her way home looking, as Mrs. Garrett had put it, like a woman who had been carrying a stone around inside her chest for a very long time. Naomi had asked her name. Mrs. Garrett had told her. Naomi had written it on the back of a grocery receipt because that was what she had in her hand. The phone rang 4 times. Then a woman's voice, low and careful. Hello, Miss Briggs. Naomi said. My name is Naomi Caldwell. I'm sitting outside courtroom 7 right now, and I have 3 questions for you. You can answer all of them. Some of them. Or none of them. Whatever you decide. I will respect it. Do you understand? A long silence. I know who you are. Dottie Mae said finally. I recognized you when you walked in. Naomi felt something loosen very slightly in her chest. Then you know why I'm calling. She said. Another long silence. Outside the courthouse window at the end of the hallway, the sky was the particular flat white of a November afternoon that has not decided whether it is going to do something about itself. The question, Dottie Mae said slowly, is not whether I know. The question is whether I am willing to say it where someone can hold me to it. Yes, Naomi said. That is exactly the question. She did not push. She had learned, over many years of conversations like this one, that the pause before a person decides to tell the truth is a sacred interval, and that the worst thing you can do in it is fill it with your own voice. She had learned to let the silence do its work. She had learned that the silence was not emptiness. It was the sound of a person calculating what they had to lose against what they could no longer carry. A pause that lasted long enough that Naomi began to count her own heartbeats. Ask your questions, Dottie Mae said. Naomi asked 3 questions. Dottie Mae answered all 3. When the call ended, Naomi sat on the bench for a long moment, holding her phone in both hands, looking at nothing. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and unfolded the legal pad. She looked at the sentence she had written across the top. The truth does not need your permission. Her father had written that for her on the morning she passed the bar exam. He had written it on a yellow post-it note and stuck it to her coffee mug. And she had peeled it off and pressed it flat into her journal, and later copied it onto every legal pad she carried. Because she had learned that the hardest part of being a lawyer was not knowing the law. The hardest part was remembering, in the rooms where power was loudest, that truth existed independently of whether anyone powerful chose to acknowledge it. She put the pad back in her pocket. She stood up. She walked back through the courtroom doors. At 2:14 in the afternoon, District Attorney Cliff Mercer rested the state's case. At 2:19, Raymond Tate called his first and only witness a character witness. Marcus Webb's high school basketball coach, a man named Gerald Simmons, who had driven 3 hours to be there, and who testified for 7 minutes about a young man who had never once been in trouble in the 4 years Simmons had known him. Prescott let Tate have his 7 minutes without interruption. That was the most consideration Marcus Webb received from that bench all day. At 2:31, Raymond Tate said, "The defense rests." "Your Honor." Prescott nodded. He looked at the clock. He began to say the words that meant he was about to send the case to the jury. That was when Naomi stood up. She stood up from the second row of the gallery. On the left side, 3 seats from Marcus Webb's mother. She did not raise her hand. She did not excuse herself. She simply stood, and she spoke clearly and without hesitation into the room. "Your Honor, I need to be heard before this case goes to the jury." The courtroom went absolutely still in the particular way of rooms where something unexpected has happened and no one has yet determined how much of a threat it represents. Prescott looked at her. That same brief, settling look. Then his face arranged itself into something that was not quite contempt but was its immediate neighbor. "Ma'am," he said, with the careful patience of a man managing an inconvenience. "This is an active proceeding. Members of the gallery do not have the floor. If you have a concern, you can speak to the bailiff and, my name," Naomi said, not raising her voice, not lowering it, keeping it at the exact calibrated level that carried to every corner of a room, "is Naomi Grace Caldwell. I am the Special Federal Prosecutor for Civil Rights Violations. Southern District, United States Department of Justice." She reached into her shoulder bag and removed a slim leather credential case. She held it open. The gold badge caught the courtroom light. "And I need to be heard," she said, "before this case goes to the jury." The silence in courtroom 7 had a texture now. You could feel it. Marcus Webb's mother made a sound that was not quite a word. Mercer was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is completely improper. This woman has no standing in this proceeding. Sit down." "Mr. Mercer," Naomi said quietly. Mercer did not sit down, but he did stop talking, which was effectively the same thing. Prescott's face had changed. The managed patience was gone. What replaced it was something harder and more careful, the expression of a man recalculating his position in real time. "Ms. Caldwell," he said, "whatever federal credentials you hold, you do not have the authority to interrupt a state court proceeding at this stage. I am going to ask you to take your seat." "You can ask," Naomi said. "I would like you to note for the record, Your Honor, that I am not sitting down." Somewhere in the gallery, a man coughed. The sound was very loud. Prescott's jaw tightened. "Bailiff, before the bailiff does anything," Naomi said, and now her voice was still level. "Still precise, but carrying something in it that the entire room could feel the way you feel. A weather change before it arrives. I want to direct the court's attention to the matter of a federal civil rights review that was initiated this morning by Judge Patricia Hollins of the United States District Court, Southern District, regarding 17 convictions obtained in this courtroom in the past 6 years. By this prosecution office in cases involving black male defendants. She reached into her shoulder bag. "I have the order here," she said, and held up a document. The review cites, among other matters, a pattern of witness testimony suppression, improper judicial instruction, limiting defense, cross-examination, and the systematic exclusion of exculpatory evidence in a pattern that rises to the level of a federal civil rights violation under 42 U.S. Code Section 1983. Mercer was on his feet again. "This is Your Honor. This is an outrage. The order," Naomi continued, her voice unchanged, "places a temporary restraint on the rendering of any verdict in this courtroom, pending the federal review. I am here, Your Honor, because I want to give this court the opportunity to comply voluntarily before I make the next phone call." She looked at Prescott. Prescott looked at her. "What next phone call?" he said, very quietly. The one to the 6 federal marshals who are currently waiting in the courthouse parking lot. Naomi said. At my request, the next 45 seconds were the loudest 45 seconds of silence Courtroom 7 had ever produced. Mercer was whispering to his second chair with the controlled urgency of a man managing a collapse he had not prepared for. Raymond Tate was standing at the defense table with his hand on Marcus Webb's shoulder. And Marcus Webb was looking at Naomi Caldwell with an expression that had not yet decided what it was: shock, disbelief, something fragile and enormous stirring underneath. Prescott had not moved. He was looking at the document in Naomi's hand, with the stillness of a man looking at something that has changed the geography of the room. Your Honor, he said finally, and his voice was still authoritative, still holding the practiced weight of a man accustomed to being obeyed. But beneath it now was something new. Something that sounded very much like a man choosing his next words with extraordinary care. I want to see that document. Of course, Naomi said. She walked forward, past the bar, past the surprised flicker on the bailiff's face, up to the bench, and she placed the document in front of Harlan Prescott. He read it. He read the first page, turned to the second, read the second. His expression did not collapse. Men like Prescott did not collapse in public. But something shifted in the architecture of his face. The way the facade of a building shifts before the structure behind it is revealed. This appears to be in order, he said finally. Yes, Your Honor, Naomi said. It is. Mercer was on his feet again. Judge, I need to object in the strongest possible terms. This federal overreach is procedurally, Mr. Mercer, Prescott said. And now his voice had changed, had become flatter, more careful. The voice of a man talking to someone he needed to stop talking. Sit down. Mercer sat down. Prescott looked at Naomi. Ms. Caldwell, what is it that you believe this court has done? I don't believe anything. Your Honor, Naomi said. I know. And in a moment, I'm going to ask this court to hear from someone who has been in this room for 31 years and has heard everything that has been said in it, including things that were said outside the record. She turned toward the corner of the courtroom. Ms. Briggs, she said quietly, would you be willing to tell the court what you told me an hour ago? Every head in courtroom 7 turned toward the small desk in the corner. Dottie Mae Briggs took off her reading glasses. She folded them carefully and set them on top of her transcription machine, a gesture that, to anyone watching, was the most deliberate and unhurried movement in that room. She stood up slowly, deliberately, the way a woman stands up when she has decided that whatever happens next, she is willing to live with. She was 63 years old. She had been invisible in this room for 31 years. 31 years is not an abstraction. 31 years means you have watched the furniture of this courtroom replaced twice. You have watched 5 different bailiffs work that door. You have watched the same fluorescent light in the far left corner flicker for 7 years before someone finally fixed it. You have transcribed sentences that changed the direction of people's lives, and then driven home and made dinner, and not said a word about what you heard. Because you signed something when you took this job, and because you needed this job, and because you understood very early and very clearly what happened to people who said things that powerful people in this room did not want said. She had seen it happen once. A court interpreter, years ago, who had told a defense attorney something about a conversation she had overheard. She had been gone within 3 months, transferred to a different county, a different court, a different building, where she didn't know anyone, and nobody knew what she had done. The transfer had been presented as a routine reassignment. Dottie Mae had understood it for what it was. She had learned the lesson that was meant to be learned from it, and she had carried it for 31 years. Alongside everything else she was carrying, she stood up and she faced the bench. Your Honor, she said, and her voice was steady, the voice of a woman who had made her decision and was not going to revisit it. In February of this year, before the Webb preliminary hearing, I was at my desk early. I was setting up my machine. Mr. Mercer and Deputy Benton came into the courtroom before anyone else arrived. They did not see me because I was behind my machine, and the lights in the back corner were not on yet. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system. I heard Mr. Mercer say to Deputy Benton, "The light question is going to come up. The defense will ask about the street lights. You say you used your flashlight for the identification. Don't volunteer the footage." She paused. Deputy Benton said, "What if the defense pulls the body cam?" She paused again. She was not pausing for effect. She was pausing the way a person pauses when they are taking something very important and making sure they are saying it correctly. The way a woman pauses who has been transcribing the words of others for 31 years and understands that precision in language is not decoration. It is the difference between a truth that holds and a truth that can be argued away. Mr. Mercer said the body cam had a technical failure. "We've already documented it." She stopped. The ventilation system hummed. In the front row of the gallery, Marcus Webb's grandmother unfolded her hands for the first time since she had sat down that morning. It was a small movement, barely visible, but Naomi saw it. And she understood what it meant. The body of a woman who had been holding herself in a posture of controlled waiting, finally receiving information that made holding feel, for one moment, unnecessary. Mercer was on his feet. His voice no longer controlled. No longer the polished instrument of a man who practiced pauses. "Your Honor, this is completely improper. She is not a witness. She has not been sworn." "Would you like to be sworn?" Naomi asked. Turning to Dottie May. "Yes," Dottie May said. "I would." The bailiff swore in Dottie May Briggs at 2:47 in the afternoon, for the next 34 minutes. Under Naomi's questioning, she recounted with the word-for-word precision of a woman who had transcribed language professionally for 3 decades, and who possessed, it became clear, a memory that recorded conversations the way her machine recorded testimony. 4 separate exchanges she had witnessed in courtroom 7, in corners and hallways and in the well of the court before sessions began. Over the previous 8 months, she named dates. She named exact language. She named the specific case numbers that corresponded to the dates she named cross-referenced, without being prompted. Against the 17 cases listed in the Federal Review Order, she did not shake. She did not hesitate. She did not look at Mercer or at Prescott. She looked at Naomi. And when Naomi was not asking a question, she looked at Marcus Webb. When she was done, the courtroom was still again. Prescott had not moved for 20 minutes. Mercer had stopped objecting 11 minutes in. When his second chair had placed a hand on his arm and said something very quietly and very urgently that no one else in the room could hear but that everyone in the room understood the nature of, Naomi turned to face the bench. "Your Honor," she said, "on the basis of the Federal Review Order, the sworn testimony of Ms. Briggs, and the evidence package submitted to Judge Hollins this morning, which includes the body cam footage that the prosecution was informed had suffered a technical failure, but which was in fact retrieved from the department's server by federal investigators yesterday afternoon, I am formally requesting that this court suspend these proceedings and release the defendant pending a full federal review of this case and the 17 prior cases named in the order." She paused. "I am also requesting," she said, "that this court note, for the record, that the prosecution of Marcus Webb appears to have been initiated and sustained through the willful suppression of exculpatory evidence and the coordination of false testimony, which constitutes a civil rights violation of the most serious order." She looked at Prescott. He looked back. For a long time, neither of them said anything. Then Prescott said, very quietly, "Mr. Mercer." Mercer looked up. "You are excused from this courtroom." Prescott said, effective immediately, "Do not speak. Do not argue. Leave." Mercer opened his mouth. "Now," Prescott said. Mercer left. At 3:22 in the afternoon, Judge Harlan Prescott, in a voice that had lost its comfortable weight and was now carrying something that sounded very close to the specific heaviness of a man who had not, perhaps, believed that this day would come, but who had known? Somewhere in the sediment of 22 years on that bench, that it could suspended the proceedings against Marcus Webb, pending the federal civil rights review. He did not look at Marcus when he said it. He looked at his bench. The words came out correct. Clear. Official. The right words in the right order. Which was, Naomi thought, the only thing left that Prescott could control in that room. He was a man who had built a life on the authority of language, on the power of certain words, said from a certain position to mean certain things and to be received as final. He still had that. He still had the robe and the bench, and the gavel, and the plaque with his name. What he had lost, in the preceding 45 minutes, was the certainty that no one was watching closely enough to make it matter. The bailiff moved to remove Marcus Webb's wrist restraints, the sound of the restraints coming off that particular sound. Quiet and metallic and final. Moved through the courtroom the way sounds. Moved through quiet rooms. Arriving in every corner at once. Marcus Webb looked down at his own wrists for a moment. He had been in those restraints since 8:30 that morning. He looked at his wrists, the way people look at a part of themselves after something has been removed from it, surprised to find it still there. Still belonging to them. Raymond Tate put both hands on Marcus's shoulders from behind and leaned forward very slightly. And he said something that no one else in the room could hear. And Marcus nodded once, a single, careful nod. Marcus Webb turned toward the gallery. His grandmother was already moving. Already through the gallery gate, before the bailiff had fully reacted. Moving with the speed and directness of a woman who had been waiting to do this specific thing since the day she had first been told what had happened to her grandson. When she reached him, she pressed both of her hands to the sides of his face and looked at him, and she did not say anything, and she did not need to, because the language that exists between a grandmother and a grandchild who has been through something enormous is not a language made of words. It is a language made of hands on a face and eyes looking into eyes, and the specific quality of being seen by someone who has known you since before you could account for yourself. His mother followed, and his sisters. The three of them surrounded Marcus Webb in the way that families surround each other after something terrible has almost happened, not dramatically, not with noise, but with the quiet, pressed-in closeness of people who have been holding something at arm's length for a very long time, and are finally permitted to let it go. And in the second row of the gallery, where she had been sitting since 9 o'clock that morning, with her brown paper lunch bag and her legal pad and her second-best suit, Naomi Caldwell watched this reunion and did not look away from it, because she had learned that the best thing a person in her position could do, after a moment like this, was to let the moment belong entirely to the people it was meant for. She allowed herself 10 seconds of that. 10 full seconds. Then she folded the legal pad and put it in her jacket pocket. She picked up her shoulder bag. She walked up the center aisle and through the doors of courtroom 7. In the hallway, she made one more phone call. "It's done," she said. "Good," said the federal marshal on the other end. "We'll hold until you confirm." "Stand down," Naomi said. They cooperated. "A pause. You don't need us. Not today," she said. "Thank you." She hung up and sat on the same wooden bench where she had made the other calls that morning. The hallway was quiet. A man in a suit she didn't recognize walked past and looked at her briefly in the way people look at a black woman sitting alone on a bench in a courthouse hallway with a kind of incurious dismissal. The assumption that she was waiting for something to happen to her rather than the thing that had just happened because of her. She didn't correct him. She opened her brown paper bag and ate her lunch. 3 weeks later, it was a Tuesday morning. Naomi was in her office in the federal district, building a small office with a window that faced another building's brick wall and a desk covered in case files when there was a knock at the door. "Come in," she said. The door opened. Raymond Tate stood in the doorway, looking slightly uncertain in the way of a man who has come to say something he has not quite rehearsed. "I won't take long," he said. "Sit down," she said. He sat. "I wanted to tell you," he said, "that the charges against Marcus Webb have been formally dropped. All of them. The federal review is still ongoing. But they've dropped the state charges pending the outcome." Naomi nodded. She had known this. And I wanted to tell you, Raymond continued, that I have been doing this job for 9 years. I have been in courtrooms that I have seen things that I told myself were just how it worked, that it was the system, and the system was what it was, and I was doing the best I could inside it. He paused. I told myself that for 9 years, and I think I was wrong. There is always a point. Naomi said. He nodded. Then he said, how did you know about Dottie Mae? Naomi was quiet for a moment. A librarian in Meridian told me that there was a woman who had worked in that courthouse for 30 years who sometimes cried on her way home. She said, I thought about that for a long time. I thought about what kind of thing a person would see every single day. For 30 years. That would make them cry on the way home. And I thought about what kind of strength it takes to go back the next morning anyway. I called her because I thought she might know something. She did, but more than that, she was waiting for someone to ask. Raymond was quiet. She's filed for retirement. He said, effective end of the month. I know. Naomi said, I wrote her a letter. He nodded and stood up. At the door. He turned back. For what it's worth, I've pulled all 17 of those case files. I'm filing motions on 12 of them. All 17. Naomi said, not 12. He looked at her. All 17. She said again, those are 17 people, not 12. He nodded once. Slowly, all 17. He said. Then he left. Marcus Webb called Naomi's office 6 days after his charges were dropped. He called at 8:47 in the morning. Early enough that Naomi was the only one in the office, and answered her own phone. He said he had gotten the number from Raymond Tate. He said he wasn't sure why he was calling. He said he had been trying to think of the right words for almost 2 weeks, and kept not finding them. You don't need words. Naomi told him, how are you? He thought about that for a moment. I keep waking up at 3 in the morning. He said, I don't know why. I just wake up. That's normal. She said, give it time. I wanted to ask you something. He said, go ahead. Why did you come? Nobody sent you there. You came on your own. I didn't know who you were. My family didn't know who you were. Why? Naomi looked at the brick wall outside her window. Because someone needed to. She said, and I was in a position to. And I had been in rooms like that courtroom, not that specific room. But rooms like it, and I had watched and said nothing. When I was younger, and less certain of myself. And I carried that for a long time. I decided a few years ago that I was not going to carry that anymore. He was quiet for a while. My grandmother keeps asking about you. He said finally, she wants to know if you're a church person. Naomi smiled. Tell her I'm a truth person. She said, I think she'll understand. He laughed. It was a short, surprised laugh. The kind that comes out when something genuinely catches you. And it was the most ordinary, human sound Naomi had heard in weeks. And she held it in her mind for a long time after they hung up. Dottie Mae Briggs retired on the last Friday of the month. She did not have a party. She did not want one. She returned her transcription machine to the courthouse supply room. Cleared out her desk, which held, in 31 years, remarkably few personal items, a small framed photograph of her daughter at age 7, a spare pair of reading glasses, and a bottle of hand lotion, and she walked out of courtroom 7 for the last time at exactly 4:30 in the afternoon. Naomi was waiting in the hallway. Dottie Mae stopped when she saw her. I thought you might be busy. Dottie Mae said, I moved some things around. Naomi said, they walked out of the courthouse together, down the wide stone steps. In the late afternoon light, the street was ordinary. Cars passed. A man sold fruit from a cart on the corner. A child ran across the parking lot ahead of his mother. Can I ask you something? Naomi said. You can ask me anything. Dottie Mae said, 31 years. Naomi said, you could have said something earlier. There were other cases. Other opportunities. You chose to stay, and you chose to stay quiet. Why? Dottie Mae walked a few steps in silence. Because I needed the job. She said simply, "I have a daughter. I have a mortgage. I am a black woman in that county. I knew what I would lose if I said something and it didn't hold. I watched what happened to people who said something when there was nobody waiting on the other side to catch them." She stopped walking. "I was not a coward," she said. "I was a person calculating my survival. There is a difference." Naomi nodded. "And then you called." Dottie Mae said, "And you told me you had the order? You told me there was already something on the other side. And I thought this is the reason I stayed. This is the day I was staying for." They stood on the sidewalk in the late afternoon light. "I don't know if that's the right way to think about it," Dottie Mae said, "but it's the truest way I know how to say it." Naomi looked at her. "That is exactly the right way to think about it," she said. 6 months later, Cliff Mercer was indicted on 7 counts of prosecutorial misconduct, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. He did not make it to the state Senate. He did not, in the end, make it past an October morning, when a federal grand jury returned its finding, and his photograph appeared on the front page of 3 newspapers with a caption that used the word indicted in the clean, final way that word has when it has been a long time coming. He had retained, in the weeks following the Courtroom 7 proceedings, 3 separate attorneys. The first 2 had advised him to consider a plea arrangement. The third had taken his retainer and told him what he wanted to hear, which was that the case against him was largely circumstantial and that a jury might be persuaded otherwise. Mercer had believed the third attorney the way people believe things that confirm what they have already decided to believe. The grand jury had disagreed. On the morning the indictment was announced, Mercer released a statement through his attorney that included the phrase politically motivated overreach. Naomi had read the statement once, on her phone, while waiting for a pot of coffee to finish brewing, and had felt something that was not satisfaction and was not anger, and was the particular coolness of a person who has done what needed to be done and does not need the outcome to validate the decision. Deputy Carl Benton was terminated from the Harlan County Sheriff's Department and faced a separate federal civil rights investigation. His cooperation with prosecutors, which had come early, had come in detail, and had come with the velocity of a man who had understood very quickly which direction the current was running would be weighed in the eventual determination of his case. Naomi had no particular feeling about Carl Benton. He had done what he had been organized and incentivized to do inside a system that had made it easy for him. The system was the thing. Benton was one instrument of it. There were others. Raymond Tate filed successful motions for review in all 17 cases. 11 convictions were vacated in full. 4 were remanded for new trial. 2 were still being adjudicated. He had worked through the holidays and most of January without taking a single day off. And when Naomi had called his office in February to check in, his paralegal had told her that he had lost 11 pounds and stopped returning personal calls but seemed, otherwise, to be doing the work of his life. Naomi understood that feeling exactly. Judge Harlan Prescott announced his retirement from the bench, citing health concerns. On the same day, the Federal Review published its preliminary findings. He issued a written statement that described his courtroom as having operated within the accepted standards of the time, a phrase that Naomi read once in her office on a Tuesday morning, and did not read again. She did not respond to it publicly. She was asked, on 2 occasions, by journalists who wanted her reaction, and she said both times the Federal Review will speak for itself, because it would, and because the thing she had been taught by her grandmother Celestine was that a response to a statement like that one only gives the statement more air, and some things do not deserve the oxygen. Marcus Webb enrolled in a 2-year automotive technology program at the community college in his neighborhood. He worked afternoons at his uncle's garage. He called his grandmother every Sunday. On a Saturday in March, he sent Naomi a photograph of himself standing beside a car he had repaired. The hood up, the engine clean. His face turned slightly toward the camera in the way of someone who was not expecting to be photographed but did not mind. He looked, in the photograph, like a young man who was quietly occupied with the work of his own life, which was, Naomi thought. The entire point, the entire reason, not heroism, not spectacle, just a young man, occupied with the work of his own life. Because no one had been permitted to take that from him. Dottie Mae Briggs went to visit her daughter in Atlanta. She stayed for 6 weeks. She said later that it was the first time in 30 years she had taken 6 weeks off in a row, and that she had forgotten what it felt like to sleep past 6 in the morning without dreaming about something she had heard in a courtroom. Her daughter had a small raised bed garden in the backyard, and Dottie Mae had spent most of the 6 weeks in that garden, which she had not expected to enjoy, and which she had, unexpectedly, found deeply restorative. There was something, she told Naomi on the phone, about working in dirt with your hands that was the opposite of sitting at a transcription machine. Both required attention, but one gave back. On a Thursday afternoon in November, Naomi Grace Caldwell parked her 2009 Honda Civic in the public lot, 3 blocks from the Harlan County Courthouse, and walked the 3 blocks slowly, the way her father had told her to. She was there because a federal oversight board had asked her to present testimony on systemic reform recommendations for the district. It was a long meeting with a lot of people in a lot of suits, and a lot of language designed to make large problems sound manageable. She gave her testimony. She answered questions. She did not raise her voice. She did not lower it. When the meeting ended, one of the board members approached her in the hallway and said, "Ms. Caldwell, I want to say that was remarkably articulate." She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. She had been told this all her life. Remarkably articulate. She had been told it by professors and colleagues and opposing counsel and judges and, by a man she was sitting next to on a plane who had asked what she did, and upon learning that she was a federal prosecutor had said, leaning back slightly, the slight compression of the lips, the forward tilt of the chin, "Well, you are just remarkably articulate," as though the relationship between a black woman and the language of her own profession was something requiring remark, as though competence in her, specifically, warranted a different category of acknowledgement than competence in anyone else. She had stopped being angry about it years ago. Anger was a fire you fed, and she had other fires she needed that fuel for. She walked out of the courthouse through the side door and stood for a moment in the late afternoon air. The sky above the building across the alley was the dark blue of a November late afternoon, the color the sky gets right before it decides to go black. A young man in a delivery uniform passed her on the narrow sidewalk without looking up from his phone. A woman was unlocking a car across the street. Somewhere down the block, someone was cooking something with garlic and oil, and the smell reached her on the cold air. Ordinary and precise. The smell of an evening that belonged to the people living it. She stood in it for a moment. Just stood in it. Because the work she did required long periods inside buildings, where the air was recycled and the light was fluorescent, and the stakes were so high and so continuous that it was easy to forget that outside those buildings the world was full of ordinary evenings. Ordinary smells. Ordinary people occupying their own lives. She thought about her grandmother Celestine, who had waited on courthouse steps for a name to be called, that was never called. She thought about the patience that required, the discipline of continuing to show up for a system that had not yet decided whether you were included in what it called justice. The decision to keep believing that it could be not because the evidence was strong, but because the alternative was a particular kind of despair that Celestine had made a decision not to choose. Naomi had inherited that decision the way she had inherited the attention, the way she had inherited the way of walking, deliberate into difficult rooms. It was not given in a formal moment. It was given across years, across thousands of ordinary days, across every small act of dignity that a woman performs when the world around her is regularly suggesting that dignity is optional. She had done what she had done not only because Marcus Webb deserved it, though he did, completely, and without condition, but because 17 people deserved it, and because Dottie Mae Briggs deserved 31 years of her life acknowledged and honored, and finally heard, and because her grandmother Celestine had taught her, without ever using these exact words. That the measure of your work was not whether it was recognized, but whether, at the end of a day, you could account for it honestly. She reached into her jacket pocket. She unfolded the legal pad. At the top of the page, in her own handwriting, the sentence her father had written for her on the morning she passed the bar exam. The sentence she had copied onto every legal pad she had carried for 20 years. The truth does not need your permission. She read it. She folded the pad back up and put it in her pocket. She walked to her car. This is a story about the architecture of injustice, how it is built not in dramatic moments of cruelty but in the accumulated ordinary decisions of people who look away, who move along, who decide that what they are carrying is too dangerous to set down in a room where it might change things. It is a story about the people who hold the truth longest, in the most difficult conditions, with the highest cost, and about what happens when someone finally builds the structure they need to be heard. It is a story about the fact that power and courage are not the same thing. Naomi Caldwell had both in that courtroom, but Dottie Mae Briggs had only one of them, and it was the harder one to come by. The lesson is not that justice always arrives. The lesson is that justice requires someone willing to be the person who brings it, not when it is convenient, not when it is safe, not when it is applauded, but when a young man is sitting very still at a defendant's table with his hands folded and his whole life hanging in the balance of a room that has already decided. The lesson is that the most important seat in that courtroom was not the judge's bench. It was not the prosecutor's table. It was not even the witness stand. It was the small desk in the corner, behind a transcription machine, where a woman had been sitting for 31 years. Invisible. Watching. Remembering. Because the truth in the end, always, without fail, regardless of how long it takes, does not need your permission. It only needs someone willing to say it out loud. If this story moved you, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed injustice and felt powerless to speak? Or have you ever seen someone stand up when everyone else stayed silent? Tell us your story, because your story matters too. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next powerful story. This story is an original work of fiction. All characters, names, legal proceedings, and events depicted are entirely fictional and are not intended to represent any real persons, actual legal cases, judicial proceedings, or real institutions. Any resemblance to actual events or persons, living or deceased, is purely coincidental, created for storytelling, emotional resonance, and to honor the dignity of all who have sat in rooms waiting for justice to arrive.